All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into Manchester United's ticket price hike.
Okay.
And it's got everyone talking.
Right.
We've got fans grappling with the cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
The team's performance is, well, let's just say it's a little shaky. And now the club's asking them to pay even more to see a match. So to help us make sense of all this, we've got a stack of fan blogs here.
Oh.
News articles, statements from supporter groups, including AMUS, the Manchester United Supporters Trust.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of them. They're pretty vocal.
Yeah, they are. So, I don't know about you, but this whole thing just seems kind of bizarre to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because the timing of this increase, it almost feels provocative.
Right.
Especially with the Glazer family still owning the club, which is already a point of contention with the fans.
Yeah.
And then you have Ineos, this new stakeholder, just coming onto the scene.
They just got here. It's like they're testing the waters, to see just how much they can get away with.
I see what you mean.
So let's break down the numbers here.
Okay.
We're talking a straight jump to £66 per game.
Wow.
And that's for everybody. Adults, kids, seniors,
Across the board.
everyone. So think about that. You're a parent.
Okay.
You want to take your child to Old Trafford. Suddenly you're looking at £132, which is more than double the previous minimum.
Oh, wow.
More than double.
That's a steep increase.
Yeah, it is. And you know what's really got the fans riled up?
What's that?
The club just made this decision. They didn't say a word to the supporter groups.
They just went ahead with it.
That's right. No consultation, no nothing.
That speaks volumes. It makes you feel like the fans are just customers to them, not stakeholders.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It does make you feel that way.
Yeah.
Now, the club's argument is that with 97% of season tickets already sold, the financial impact of this increase is going to be minimal,
Okay.
at least in the short term.
I see.
But one of the news articles we have here, it suggests that this could actually be a strategic move,
Really?
a trial balloon,
Right.
for even bigger increases next season.
So it's a risky gamble, especially when you consider how the economy is right now. And the fans, let me tell you, they are not holding back.
I bet.
The blogs are on fire. There's a real sense of betrayal.
Yeah.
It's not just about the money either.
It's about more than that.
It's about feeling exploited, like
Yeah.
they're being blamed for the team's struggles, like they're being ignored.
By the people in charge.
Exactly. One quote that really stood out to me was from a fan blog.
Okay.
It said, they're treating us like cash cows, squeezing us dry while the team flounders on the pitch.
Wow. That's harsh.
It is, but I think it really captures how a lot of these fans feel.
Yeah, that feeling of being taken advantage of. It's all over the fan responses we have.
Absolutely.
And to really understand this anger, I think we have to look at Must-T's history.
Okay.
They've been fighting against takeovers for a long time. First with Rupert Murdoch back in the day,
Oh, yeah.
and then, of course, with the Glazers.
Right.
So this outrage that we're seeing now, it's not coming from nowhere. It's rooted in years of battling for fan interests.
Fighting to be heard.
Exactly.
And speaking of must, their statement about this price hike, they don't hold back.
Oh,
They call it offensive. They accuse the club of putting commercial interests ahead of the needs of their loyal supporters, especially during a cost of living crisis. So it's clear they see this as another sign that the club's leadership is out of touch.
out of touch with the fan base.
Yeah,
It's interesting how Ineos is getting dragged into all of this, too.
you're right.
When they first came in, there was this sense of, I don't know, maybe a sliver of hope
Okay.
that they might bring a different approach.
Yeah.
But this price hike, it kind of throws a wrench into that.
It's a reality check, reminding the fans that new ownership doesn't necessarily mean a change in how things are run.
Right.
But to be fair, we should look at this from the club's point of view, too.
Sure.
They're saying they need financial stability to compete at the highest level.
That's a fair point.
Right. And they're pointing to other clubs, like Manchester City, where ticket prices have gone way up over the past decade.
Okay. So they're basically saying this is just the reality of modern football.
That's where things get complicated. You have the cold, hard economics of running a top-tier club, clashing with the social role of football.
That emotional connection,
Exactly.
especially for communities like Manchester.
Right.
So to be blunt, financial sustainability means being able to afford top players,
Yeah.
maintain facilities, and compete for trophies.
That's right.
So the club is essentially saying, we need to charge more to keep up with the big boys. But that raises a big question.
What's that?
Is it fair to expect the fans especially families and younger generations, to shoulder the burden of this. We're talking about potentially pricing out the people who make up the heart and soul of the club.
Host. It's a tough balancing act, for sure.
Yeah.
But one thing that really jumped out at me from Musty's statement was their call for the club to look at other options
Okay.
before just raising ticket prices. They specifically mentioned issuing new shares as a way to raise capital. Now, that's an interesting idea, and it seems to be gaining traction with some of the fans. But is it really viable? I'm curious to get your take.
Well, issuing new shares basically means selling off part of the club's ownership to investors.
Okay.
It's a pretty common practice in the business world, and it can be a good way to get cash into a company without directly impacting customers.
Or in this case, the fans.
Right.
So theoretically, it could work for a football club.
Potentially.
Yeah.
But it's not a simple solution. One of the news articles we have, it goes into some of the potential downsides.
Okay.
For one thing, issuing new shares can dilute the ownership stake of existing shareholders.
So the Glazers and Ineos?
Exactly. And that could lead to power struggles, conflicts of interest.
And wouldn't that make the club more beholden to investors, which could further alienate the fans?
Exactly. It's a delicate situation. Another point the articles bring up is that issuing new shares, it's not a guaranteed fix for financial problems. It has to be part of a bigger strategy, one that addresses things like controlling player salaries, making smart investments.
So it's not a magic bullet, but it is an option worth considering. It seems like M. Muss is trying to get the club to think outside the box, to look at all the options before they resort to squeezing the fan base.
Absolutely. And their proposal really highlights something important.
What's that?
There's usually more than one way to solve a problem
Okay.
when it comes to financial sustainability.
Eh.
Clubs need to be more creative, more innovative in how they approach it.
You know, going back to that quote from the fan blog, they're treating us like cash cows.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about what it means to be a fan these days.
In today's football landscape,
Are we just consumers? Or are we something more?
that's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And this whole situation with Manchester United, it's forcing us to confront that.
It is. It's highlighting the tension between the commercial interests of the clubs and the emotional investment of the fans.
Like, we're at a crossroads. On the one hand, you've got this push for bigger profits, for global expansion, for turning these clubs into brands.
Right.
And on the other hand, you've got the desire to keep the soul of the game alive, the sense of community, the connection between the club and its supporters.
Finding that balance, that sweet spot, it's not easy.
Especially in the Premier League, where the money is just insane.
I think that's where the conversation needs to change. We need to start talking about how to create a better model for football.
One that doesn't just rely on squeezing the fans.
Exactly. We need to look at other ways to generate revenue.
Like those suggested by Muss.
Right. And we need to think about how to make the game more affordable.
More accessible for everybody.
Because if we price out the average fan, what are we left with?
A sterile, soulless spectacle that only the rich can enjoy.
And that's not football, is it?
It's not.
I think most people involved in the game, whether they're owners or executives or players or fans, deep down they understand that. They understand that football thrives on passion,
Loyal.
on that connection between the club and its supporters.
Now, I do want to dig a little deeper into some of the specific concerns raised by Manchester United fans.
Okay.
We've talked about the financial burden, but the blogs and the supporter group statements, they're also full of anger and frustration over the lack of communication, the lack of transparency from the club.
That's a good point. It does seem like the fans are feeling more and more disconnected.
From the decision-making process?
They're not being consulted, they're not being informed, and they're definitely not being listened to.
One blog post put it like this, and I quote, "We're being treated like mushrooms kept in the dark and fed manure."
Wow, that's quite the image.
I know.
But it does get the point across. This feeling of being ignored.
Disrespected.
Yeah. And it's not just about this ticket price hike. It's about a pattern of behavior. Like, the club cares more about profit than about people.
It's like they've forgotten that a football club is more than just a business.
Right. It's a community, a cultural institution with deep roots.
You know, as I was going through all these responses from the fans, what really struck me was how emotionally invested they are in the club.
Yeah.
It's not just about watching a game.
It's about identity,
Belonging.
shared history.
Exactly.
And when that gets disregarded, when fans feel taken for granted, it can really hurt.
It's like a betrayal. And it can
Yeah.
lead to apathy, to that feeling of why bother?
Which is really bad for the club in the long run.
Because a club without passionate fans is nothing.
It's just a shell.
A brand.
A logo.
And I think that's what's at stake here. This isn't just about a few extra pounds on a ticket. It's about the soul of Manchester United, about the future of the club's relationship with its supporters.
It's about whether they can find a way to fix this,
To rebuild trust.
to create a better model for the future.
Because if they don't, they risk losing something much more valuable than money.
They risk losing the heart and soul of the club.
Makes you wonder what the alternative could be. Imagine if Manchester United actually stepped back and said, okay, how can we be a club that actually puts fans first?
That's an interesting thought. What would a fan-centric Manchester United even look like?
Right. Well, we actually see some ideas in the supporter group statements.
Oh, really?
They're not just complaining, they're offering solutions.
Right.
Ideas for how to do things differently.
Interesting.
One suggestion that keeps coming up is greater fan representation.
Makes sense.
And I don't mean just token gestures. I'm talking real decision-making power.
Like a seat on the board.
Exactly. Maybe even a majority stake.
Wow.
Having a voice at the highest level would completely change things.
It would force the club to actually listen.
Right. They'd have to consider the fans' perspective on everything.
From ticket prices to transfers.
Exactly.
And, you know, some fans are even talking about a more radical approach.
What's that?
Fan ownership.
Oh, wow.
We've seen it in Germany, where fans have the majority stake in some club.
Right. And those clubs tend to be...
More stable, more financially responsible, more connected to their communities.
For sure.
Now, whether that model would work in the Premier League, that's a whole other question.
Yeah. But it does make you think, who should really be in control of a football club?
Right.
Especially now when clubs are seen as global brands, investment opportunities.
It's a good question.
So this fan-centric Manchester United, they might also prioritize investments that actually benefit the supporters.
Okay.
Things like upgrading facilities, improving the matchday experience, and of course, keeping ticket prices affordable.
Right.
One of the news articles actually mentioned a fan-led initiative to create a fan zone outside Old Trafford.
Really?
A place where people could gather before and after matches, enjoy live music,
You're right.
really build that sense of community.
I love that.
Me too. And imagine if Manchester United actually took the lead on affordable ticketing,
What do you mean?
like a sliding scale based on income, or discounts for families and younger fans.
That would be huge.
It would, a real game changer.
It would show that they actually care.
Right, that they want everyone to be able to experience the game, not just the wealthy elite.
It would go a long way towards fixing things with the fans.
It really would. And you know something else that's essential for a fan-centric club?
What's that?
Transparency and communication.
Makes sense.
Imagine regular forums where fans could talk directly to club officials,
Okay.
ask tough questions, share their own ideas.
So it's about building trust.
It is, showing the fans that they're more than just customers.
They're stakeholders.
Right.
They're the heart of the club,
Exactly.
and their voices deserve to be heard.
This whole deep dive into Manchester United, it's been really eye-opening.
It has. It's shown us the cracks in the modern game.
Yeah.
The growing gap between the clubs and the supporters.
It's also given us a glimpse of what could be
A different way forward.
where the fans are at the center. So to our listeners out there, we leave you with this. What kind of future do you want for football? A game controlled by corporations and profits? Or a game that values its fans?
It's communities.
Its soul. The choice is yours. The future of football is in your hands.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.